Welcome back to the Cover 2 Zone. We are back in week 4. We missed out on the review show last week as I was in Slovenia. Me and Eden did try to make it work, but when you're on holiday, you want to enjoy your holiday, and we just couldn't make the timings work, unfortunately. So apologies for that, but we're back this week. Eden is away again this week now, scheduling conflicts again, as we've got a guest. We've got Oli, former housemate and teammate of mine, and I'm going to say you've got your Bengals jersey there on. I was going to say Bengals fan, but I famously remember you renouncing your support for the Bengals when they drafted Joe Burrow, and I'm never going to let you forget that.
I'm still on the fence, but this is obviously pre-Burrow. This is in the Marvin Lewis days. This jersey's from, so I feel like I can still wear this, and it's not not breaking my own rules. But yeah, I mean, I said at the point we drafted Burrow, we should have drafted an offensive lineman. I said the year after we should have drafted an offensive lineman. Joe Burrow is out for most of the season, if not the whole season. So I think I'm still correct. But
I don't think you are. He's one of the best players in the league.
Oh, yeah.
It was definitely the right decision. And yeah, who was the guy? Can you remember who the guy you thought should have gone?
No idea.
Oh yeah, conveniently you can't remember who that was.
I wanted Penei Sewell, and I think people, he's a very good offensive lineman, but I was probably wrong on that one as well.
Yeah, you were.
Every year then, that's on the team. Every year since that they've not drafted a tackle in the first round, that's on the team.
We're going to look back at week 3, some really, really interesting games in week 3. And then we're going to look ahead halfway through the show to week 4. And again, some interesting games that keep on coming. So on the topic of the Bengals, let's start with that dismantling of the Bengals by the Minnesota Vikings this week. Carson Wentz starting for the Vikings with McCarthy out, and Jake Browning starting for the Bengals with Joe Burrow out. So both second-string quarterbacks for both of these teams. Wentz, 14 from 20 for 173 yards, 2 touchdowns. Browning, 19 from 27, 140 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. So not bad for Jake Browning. I mean, the 2 picks obviously aren't great, but the Minnesota defense in this game, as an owner of that defense on fantasy, they had about as good a game as you can imagine. And particularly Isaiah Rodgers had probably the best game I've ever seen of a defensive player, especially a defensive back. He was unbelievable. A pick 6, 2 forced fumbles, one of which he recovered himself and took for a touchdown, and a big pass defend against Chase in the end zone as well. He had the day of all days, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And I've got written down here, obviously, number 2 Vikings to talk about. And I think it's important to note, as always, that first pick, Harrison had a tip on it. So, you can't put that completely on Browning's shoulders. But yeah, what a play, and what a game from a young fellow, really sort of making the name for himself there. I think, when we talk about this game as a backup quarterback showdown, it's a bit unfair to think of Carson Wentz and Jake Browning as both backup quarterbacks. They've got very different levels of experience in the league. But equally, the Vikings went out and made sure they had a backup quarterback that could do the job, and the Bengals didn't. So,
Yeah, and it was 48-10 this game to the Vikings. And I think, you're spot on in that obviously we've seen with the Vikings over the last few years, they've moved quarterbacks on. Sam Darnold came in last year. They've moved him on to Seattle, and Kirk Cousins the year before that. And both of those quarterbacks had played really well. And me and Eden have discussed Kevin O'Connell's competency when it comes to getting the best out of his quarterbacks. And as you said, starting JJ McCarthy this year is a big decision. He's not a rookie, but he's, it's his first year properly playing in the league. And as you said, having somebody like Carson Wentz's experience to come in if he does get injured, which has happened, and he obviously had the injury last year, to back him up, and for JJ McCarthy to learn from a guy like that, right? He's won a Super Bowl at the end of the day. It's really good management, isn't it, from Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings front office?
Yeah, and in a guy like Carson Wentz, you've got someone who has shown on multiple teams in multiple places that he can get into good chemistry with receivers quite quickly. You know, when you've got receivers like Jefferson there, you need someone who's going to step in and instantly be throwing to the right places and doing the right things. And I think that's, you know, Browning's been at the Bengals for a couple of years, but clearly hasn't run with the ones very much because he just didn't have chemistry with Higgins and Chase, you know. So it's, yeah, I think as a Bengals once upon a time fan, I didn't hold out much hope for the game generally, but I thought, or maybe facing a backup quarterback could help us. But as you say, the defense had a hell of a game. Jordan Mason at running back, 116 yards, 2 touchdowns. Really, really good game from him as well. So, yeah, I think that the Vikings, by halftime up 34-3, really sort of outclassed the Bengals there.
Is this a concern for the Bengals? This obviously, when Joe Burrow went down, that's obviously a huge concern, and that's obviously a huge factor in deciding that, well, however long he's going to be out for in those games, it's obviously going to be a huge factor. Is the manner of this loss more of a concern for the Bengals, do you think? Or, you know, they're still 2-1. They have still won 2 games beforehand. Is it more of a concern that Joe Burrow is out, or is this a more concerning loss for the Bengals?
I think you probably, you see Joe Burrow being out and you go, right, well, we can write off the season there, and that's unfortunate. But it shows a lot of weakness in the rest of the team, which was bound to happen when you're paying more than half of your salary cap to a quarterback and 2 wide receivers. You know, it was going to happen. The defense is not good. You know, and then not good's probably an understatement there. But they have a new defensive coordinator, so they've tried to make that change in terms of play calling. That's clearly not the solution. It is a player problem, and it's going to take potentially quite a high draft pick if Burrow is out for the rest of the season to maybe start to turn that around. I'd like to see them keep Trey Hendrickson, but at $30 million, that then makes it almost 3/4 of your salary cap going to 4 players. For a team that doesn't have very much money and certainly doesn't have the money to give out guarantees in the way that other teams do, it's not the best idea for the Bengals, but it means they're really going to have to spend that money well in free agency to bring in some vets that maybe need a second chance. Yeah.
And, you know, we mentioned that defense in the off season, and you said it there. They haven't really set the world on fire still, even in those wins against the Jags and the Browns. Browns are very low-powered offense, and then the Jags, who, you know, are still warming up, I guess, offensively, still gave up 27 points, and the offense was able to get them over the line in that game. And then you go and you concede 48 points. Yes, the defense didn't concede all of those points, granted, but you know, you give that up to a Carson Wentz-led Vikings team and a Jordan Mason at running back. You know, this is not their first-string running back. He's a good running back, but so you've got a second-string quarterback and a second-string running back dominating the game over you. It's a big concern for the Bengals. Moving on to our second game that we're looking back on, probably the most surprising scoreline of the weekend: Carolina 30, the Falcons 0. And when I looked at this game, I expected the Panthers offensively to be very, very good, and the stats for Bryce Young and the likes of Ted McMillan, very good. But they don't jump off the page, do they? It was a game. It's a really odd game for the scoreline that it was. I mean, Carolina's defense was outstanding, but it was. I mean, Bryce Young was good, and Chuba Hubbard was good, and Ted McMillan had a better game, but it didn't fill you with excitement and enthusiasm, did it? No.
And in fairness, the scoreline should have been 30-6. Those 2 missed field goals were. We'll come on to that in a sec. But yeah, they're not a team of stars, are they? The Panthers. JC Horn on the defense, obviously in a world of his own there compared to the rest of the team. But yeah, you wouldn't be looking at, I mean, too early to say with Ted McMillan potentially, but you wouldn't be looking at Bryce Young or Chuba Hubbard or Tommy Tremble as top 15 guys in their positions in the league, let alone star players. But they showed they could put together enough to win a game, albeit against a Falcons team that just, if I'm saying that the Panthers don't have stars, the Falcons, have the exact same tagline, really. I don't believe in Michael Penix at all.
Yeah, but they got Bijan Robinson and then and then, Kyle Pitts is not a star, but he's one of these guys who's been very frustrating, hasn't he, in the league? And he's got that ceiling that everyone thinks he's got that ceiling, and he's really yet to reach. So there is star power on the Falcons. It's not been realised.
Not being used, and whether that's an offensive line problem potentially, as well as what I would describe as poor quarterback play and poor decision making. There's end of the first half, Penix throws a pick six.
It's such a lazy throw, wasn't it?
Not then. End of the first half, Penix throws to the middle of the field, no timeouts left. Literally, Mooney catches the ball, falls on the floor. That's the end of the half, and you go, that's poor decision making. Really poor decision making. Later on, first play of the second half, first drive of the second half, he throws a pick six, and again, it's an obvious read for the corner. Really obvious read.
Yeah. It was a lazy throw, wasn't it? It was such a lazy throw. And the announcer, the color commentator, as soon as he threw it, before he was even in the end zone, it was Chuo Wade, I think, was the defender. I might have butchered that name, but before he'd even walked into the end zone, the color commentator said, "That's on Michael Penix. That's all on Michael Penix." It was a really lazy throw, and I don't know. I'm a little bit hotter on Michael Penix than you are. Perhaps I do think he has played well, and I did pick the Falcons at the start of the season to be a little bit of a dark horse. I picked them to be in the playoffs. I picked them to challenge the Buccaneers at the top of the NFC South. I thought, yes, the Bucs are a good team, but the rest of that division is, well, the Saints are pretty awful, and the Panthers are still building. So I did think there was a real opportunity for the Falcons to challenge in this division, and they might still. It's still early days, but they've been disappointing so far, I think. And one issue that this week they cut Younghoe Koo, a kicker who has made a lot of really big kicks for them in previous years. And they bring in John Romo, who then, as you said, missed 2 field goals this week. Yes, I think they were over 50 yards each, both of them, but that's just another issue for the Falcons, isn't it? And it looks terrible in a week where they've cut Younghoe Koo.
Certainly the first one as well. It almost felt worse than a miss because it was a proper sort of banana shape. It looked bang on and then just veered. But I mean, teams get kicker curses. It happens, and you end up with 4 or 5 kickers across the season, and let's hope that Romo can turn that around and he's not looking for another job soon. But it's not looking great for the Falcons at this point. I've noted down here, and I can't quite remember why I've written it, but I wrote Bryce Young has to do too much. I think during the game there were times where Bryce Young was having to, scramble about and do this and make plays rather than having his team make plays around him, which is what you want for a young quarterback that hasn't always shone. Trying to build him back up, you need the team to make plays around him, and it felt a few times like Bryce Young was having to make a lot of the plays himself.
And I think that's just comes from the Panthers are not a talented team at all, as we've mentioned, and they're still very much a work in progress team, and the offensive line isn't great. I think Chuba Hubbard is probably a little bit underrated. I think he plays a big role in this team, and he's really played a big part over the last couple of seasons for them. But as you said, I don't think there's a huge amount of talent elsewhere on the field. Obviously, Ted McMillan's still new. He's still finding his feet in the NFL. Xavier Legette hasn't really done anything of note. So I agree. He is. They are relying on him to make plays, and as you said, for a guy who's struggled a little bit in the league, and that's kind of what CJ Stroud did last year, and he was able to make those plays and extend those plays, and sorry, the year before last, sorry, and Jaden Daniels did last year. He was kind of that quarterback that you want Bryce Young to be, I guess.
Almost reminds me a bit of early Seahawks Russell Wilson, sort of just running around hoping that something will come off, and it did come off. And then for Russell Wilson, it stopped coming off eventually, and then we've had the latter arc of Wilson's career. So yeah, I think for Bryce Young, it's how long are they going to stick with him? Hopefully, quite a while. He's playing better this season, but how long can they stick with him, and what can they give him rather than contributing more to their defense?
A rushing touchdown for him in this game, something we haven't really seen too much from Bryce Young. Yes, I think he only rushed for 8 yards off 2 attempts, but if he can use his legs a little bit more, as you mentioned, and extend plays, then it gives defenses something else to think about with him, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah. It means you have to keep a spy in that defensive secondary, and then maybe things can build from there.
On to the third game, so the biggest upset perhaps of the week. Browns 13, Packers 10. Nobody really saw this one coming, and to me, it kind of highlighted, or definitely raised it in my mind, how underrated this Browns defense has been through the first few weeks. I mean, I think they actually came into the week as the number one defense, amazingly. The D-line for them is just insane. I mean, you've got Myles Garrett on there, who is the best defensive player in the league. They get to Jordan Love 5 times in this game. And I think it just, after that, the previous week against the Bengals, where they had those couple of plays where they had 3 sacks in a row. Myles Garrett almost had 3 sacks in a row himself. Having a player like that on that defensive line just means that the opposition's offensive line have to put so much into blocking him, and it opens up lanes for others to pass rush, and we're seeing that with the Browns defensive line, aren't we? They're all getting home, it seems, at the minute, and even Myles Garrett, who's been double and triple teamed everywhere, is getting home as well.
Yeah, they're certainly the offensive line's having to set that double team up on him, and then also generally setting a running back in pass protection to that side of the line as well. It really means that you've got a 3-on-1 and then 3 guys, maybe 4 if they're sending an extra rusher with no one to block them. It really does,
And you've got no check down option to a running back because he's in pass protection.
Exactly, and it takes off some of that ability to see the field. If you've got that many players taking up that bit of your vision as a quarterback, you can't see those underneath throws as well. I've got noted down here, Jordan Love was pressured on 42% of snaps, passing snaps, 42% pressure, which is just, how can you expect to get a ball off and hit your targets? But he does still in this game play relatively well, Jordan Love. I think, and there's at least one sort of designed quarterback run that goes quite well for him. And I think also, it's a game of 2 defensive lines that need talking about. That Browns defensive line's fantastic, but Parsons and Rashawn Gary is just scary.
Yeah, I had that noted down. 7 sacks between these 2 teams in this game. Obviously 5 for the Browns, 2 for the Packers. And yeah, as you mentioned, Parsons, Rashawn Gary. I don't think Wyatt played in this game, but he's been unbelievable this season for the Packers as well. Absolutely. And I've got that written down as well. These 2 defensive lines are just awesome. And they gave the quarterbacks in this game hell, really. But Joe Flacco, again, it doesn't jump off the page, but the Browns had 0 points on the board going into under 5 minutes in the fourth quarter in this game. It was insane. And then you said Jordan Love played fairly well. He does throw that crucial interception in the fourth quarter, which then hands possession back to the Browns. and they score their touchdown, which kind of gets them back into the game. And then a huge block for the Browns on special teams. Just unbelievable leads then. Andre Schmidt to kick a 55-yard game winner. It was just huge, wasn't it?
And the play before that blocked field goal, there's a punched out ball that the refs rule not a fumble. But I think that could have just as easily been the turnover there. As it is, they block the field goal anyway. So it
and when you're watching that, you think, and that call doesn't go the Browns' way, and it sets up a pretty much a game-winning field goal for the Packers. As a Browns fan, you must be thinking that here we go again. This always happens to us. It's always something where we throw the game away. It used to happen to the Lions all the time before the sort of Dan Campbell era. It was very Lions-ish to give a game away like that. And it's been very Brownsy for a long time. Yeah. And this game was different. It went the way of the Browns. And you know, obviously I'm not a big Packers fan, as you know. So it was kind of nice for once to see it go this way. But one big performer this week was Quinshon Judkins, who had a huge week, 18 carries, 94 yards, and a touchdown in a game that was pretty defensive. As we've mentioned, these two defenses really good, so not easy to gain offensive yards. And he's a rookie that's come in, and they've wanted it to him to make an impact. Obviously, Nick Chubb moving on now as well. There's a big hole to fill in that offense, and he's doing well so far, isn't he?
Yeah, and it's, you know, unfortunately for him, and there's always players like this in the NFL. Certainly, this first season of his is going to be tarred with that. Should he be playing right now? Should he be suspended? You know, he didn't sign his contract until the season had already started because of what was weighing over him with that. There was even talks of him going back and playing another year of college and re-entering the draft next season because he hadn't signed a contract. So I think, you know, to go from that instability to certainly being the clear and obvious number one running back on that team now in such a short window is, you know, quite impressive in a way. I do think Jerome Ford is still, you know, very good as a number two. But yeah, certainly he's playing very well there. I think David Njoku had a decent game. You know, he's a bit like Kyle Pitts, maybe a few years further down the line. He's a player that everybody really thought was going to be the next generational tight end. And he's never quite broken into that top 5 tight ends in the league. He's just sort of, you know,
he's been very solid for the Browns, hasn't he? On a team that struggled on offense a lot over the years. He's been a reliable member of that offense, hasn't he? Absolutely. Even when he had his facial injury from that fire, you know, he still came through after that, which, you know, could have really hurt his career. But he's been really solid, hasn't he? And really impressive.
Yeah, and his contributions to the run game as well. I think, you know, in the modern league where we're watching these tight ends that are looking more and more like wide receivers and they're catching the ball a lot, you don't see them blocking that much. And Njoku definitely is one that is doing both parts of his job very well.
And another on the other side of this game, another tight end who exactly fits that category is Tucker Kraft, who has been outstanding throughout this year, both catching and run blocking. As you say, he's a traditional tight end, isn't he? Where he can do both.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, when he first got to the Packers, you know, I was looking at him thinking, you know, what's the comp for Tucker Kraft? Who is he like? And I was thinking at the time, sort of Dawson Knox at the Bills, similar type of player. And yeah, he's been very solid for them in his first couple of seasons. So yeah, really quite good to see classic tight ends coming back in a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to perhaps the craziest game of the week, the Bucks 29, Jets 27. A crazy game that went back and forth. Tyrod Taylor starting this week for the injured Justin Fields, and this was just a game that ebbed and flowed, and the Bucks went up, and then the Jets came back, and then there was that blocked field goal by Will McDonald that was recovered by him as well, taken for a touchdown late on. And did you see Aaron Glenn's dance at the end of that? I mean,
Yeah.
I am here for that all season. If Aaron Glenn's going to dance when the Jets do something well, that was just a spur of the moment, improvise. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to do some sort of weird dance, almost like a bit Brentish from Aaron Glenn. But it comes back to bite him as Baker shows his experience and his resilience and leads the Bucks down the field to kick a field goal to win the game. And a heartbreaking one for the Jets, who, we'll come on to talk more about them and how they've been this season in our preview. But yeah, what a game. What a game.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that I've got written on my notes is to just comment on how disgusting that Bucks uniform is. The white and creamsicle orange is just horrible.
I agree. A lot of people like it. I've seen a lot of people say, I love that old school Bucks logo. I don't like it at all, personally. I think their new one is so much better.
Yeah.
Keep playing in that. Retire that jersey. I completely agree.
No, it was just the first thing. I had to write it down. I knew I had to say it. It was just horrific. But my biggest takeaway from this game is Emeka Booker is such a good player. In that first quarter, the one-handed catch on the sideline, it's just he's the real deal, isn't he?
Yeah, and when they drafted him, I heard on draft night, they were saying this is perhaps the guy who is most ready to play in the NFL that we've ever seen. Almost, this guy he's almost a Chris Godwin rebirth, almost with Godwin being injured, and it's just he has to step up in this game as well because Mike Evans goes out of the game injured, so. He's just been, unbelievable for this Bucks team. I heard people say on draft night that he was the most impressive interview that a lot of the teams had. So there's clearly a really great character there, and he's showing exactly why the Bucks took him, isn't he?
Yeah, and also stepping up for the Bucks, a player that I always thought was far better than he put out in the league up to this point, Sterling Shepard. He's a player that's been done dirty by the Giants for having the quarterbacks that he's had over his career, that, he's gone somewhere else and suddenly a decent quarterback throwing him the ball. And obviously Mike Evans is out and that's how he's got on the field, but he's looking good in those couple of plays that he had, compared to the years of whoever the Giants wanted to put at quarterback, just not getting him the ball.
Yeah. And I think there is reasonable grounds now for whoever owns the stadium, MetLife Stadium, to rename it as the Graveyard, because they have two teams that play there now, and it seems that everyone who gets out of either of those two teams plays so much better on their other team. We've seen it with Barkley, obviously with the Eagles. We're seeing it now with Daniel Jones in Indianapolis. Yeah. Yes, it's early on, and we'll discuss the Colts a little bit later on. And he said, yeah, exactly, with Sterling Shepard. It's just, the Giants are the Giants at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, and then, I feel like I'm talking about the Bucks a lot here and not so much the Jets. A fantastic read on the pick six by Jamel Dean. Really good. He sees Wilson stop running and he just goes for it, straight in front of him, ball's there, gone. The commentary on the color commentators talking about how the receiver should never have stopped running. He should have worked back to the ball. Perhaps that's what's given Dean the read in the first place, but he just steps in front and goes. And it's really, really good play by him.
And the Jets offense, do you think is it starting to click, do you think? I mean, Tyrod Taylor was in this game, played pretty well in this game, to be fair, coming in. But with Justin Fields back this week now, we'll discuss a little bit more. Is this Jets offense starting to click, do you think?
I think it might in the passing game. I think it might be getting there. But I think in the running game, it's really, really not. And as you say, we might talk about it a little bit later. But, over the last 2 weeks, Breece Hall's averaged, let me check what I have written down. Don't want to get it wrong. 2.6 yards a carry for Breece Hall over the last 2 weeks. Yeah. That is not good by any metric. Certainly, you talk about 3+ being that sort of standard that you want. 2.6 means you've fallen quite short of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving on to our final game that we are going to review, Monday Night Football, the Ravens 30, Lions 38. Big statement win for the Lions, and a tough start for the Ravens kind of continues in this game. Despite a huge game for David Montgomery, 12 carries, 151 yards, 2 touchdowns, and Amon-Ra St. Brown played really well in this game as well. For the Ravens, Mark Andrews looked a lot better in this game. Lamar played pretty well. And it just leaves me, back and forth game, absolute shootout. 2 really good teams. I think this was an excellent standard of football on both sides. It just raises questions to me that are the Ravens, can they get to that next level? Because at the moment they're losing to their Super Bowl contender rivals, aren't they?
Yeah, and as you say, Super Bowl contender, definitely. Most people, the schedule planners, would have had this circled as a Super Bowl preview potentially, and it really is, very Ravens to be losing that sort of game. Third game in a row with a Derrick Henry fumble, I believe, or at least averaging 1 a game if it's not third in a row, which is, in his career, very uncharacteristic of Derrick Henry, and the rest of his stats seem fine, but a man like that can't be fumbling that often.
Yeah, and I'm wondering whether teams are, he's so difficult to stop, especially when he gets up to speed, whether teams have seen that little bit of potency to fumble the ball, and they're just going, instead of tackling him, we're just going to throw our hands at the ball and hope that we can get the ball out and recover it, because he is so hard to stop when he gets up to speed and when he gets blocks. Maybe that's something the teams are looking at. I don't know.
Yeah, there's probably a bit of that. And I think also, across his career, the Browns seem to be the one team he can't get it going against. And maybe everybody else has started to go, right, what is it that the Browns are doing against Derrick Henry? They watch so much tape, they do so much thinking. What is it that the Browns are doing, and how can we apply that to our game? I think, but I think also flipping that over and looking at the Lions, they're just such a potent offense, and every element of it. You mentioned Montgomery, you mentioned Amon-Ra, but Jameson Williams had a good game. Jahmyr Gibbs still had a good game. I think as a team, the Lions have spent years building their offensive line, and that's their go-to thing. And I know they lost Kevin Zeitler for this season; he's gone elsewhere, but still, that Lions offensive line just is unstoppable. And Monty's big run at the end of the third, you just see the waves part, and he's just got that classic sort of highlight play. Offensive line just makes a hole and he's gone. And I think, they're going to be a really, really hard team to beat with the combination of offensive and defensive line they've got.
Yeah, and there was a lot of questions, especially Eden was very skeptical of the Lions this year, having lost both of their coordinators, a huge change to their team. And, that is a huge change, isn't it? And we have seen a little bit of obviously lost in week 1 to the Packers. So this was a big statement win, I think, for them, that they are still the team that, we expect them to be. And as you said, that offense is really, really hot at the moment. The defense doesn't seem to have the same sting as it once did. And they've got Aiden Hutchinson back. Brian Branch had a few opportunities in this game to pick the ball off. He had one of his poorer games, as you would say, but Jack Campbell was pretty good in this game as well. So the defense, they're still warming up, I think, but at the moment the offense is able to carry this team, isn't it?
Worth saying, their defensive star of this game would have been Al-Qadim Muhammad. He, was everywhere in that backfield. When Hutchinson wasn't doing it, he was there. I think you're right, potentially fair to say that their defensive backs aren't of the same standard as they were before, and that's because they had players in on the cheap who were moved on from where they had been and so now want more money. But I think, it really sort of impressive in that defensive line particularly. A couple of another players to mention, Mark Andrews had a great game. I was one certainly pre-season saying, I'm avoiding him in all my fantasy leagues. He's getting old. He's probably gone past that hill, but he's proving me wrong so far. And also worth mentioning, just because I forgot he was still playing, DeAndre Hopkins. Lovely,
unbelievable catch
on the sideline.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, I can't remember who it was against, but he had that unbelievable touchdown catch. And he can still play. He 100% can still play. We'll run through quickly some of the other results from week 3. The Bills beat the Dolphins 31-21. A better performance from the Dolphins, but no surprise there. The Jags beat the Texans 17-10. Big divisional matchup there in the AFC South. The Colts continue on their good start to the season, 41-20 win over Cam Ward and his Titans. The Commanders win 41-24 against the Raiders. The Eagles beat the Rams, heartbreaking loss for the Rams late on, 33-26. The Patriots fall to the Steelers 21-14. The Chargers, again, continue their really good start, 23-20 win against the Broncos. Seahawks beat the Saints 44-13. The Bears beat the Cowboys 31-14. The 49ers beat the Cardinals 16-15, an absolute nail-biter there in San Fran. The Chiefs get their first win in the season, 22-9 win against the Giants as well to round off that. So let's move on to week 4. First game we're going to preview is the Steelers and the Vikings. First regular season game anyway, in Ireland, in Dublin, taking place at the home of the GAA, Croke Park. Two teams who are 2-1, and the Vikings come into this week, obviously, after a monster week, as we've discussed earlier. Steelers are pretty good defense too, so this is going to be, on paper, a good defensive battle, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think worth saying, first NFL game of the regular season in Dublin, but not the first football game.
No.
The college football's there, start of the season every year, and it normally makes for an upset game.
I've got written down here, and I'll ask you this question then. Do these games often come down, that we've seen the London games, Madrid games, maybe not so much the Brazil game because it's not as far maybe, but do these games come down to often who handles the travel better and the week itself?
Very potentially, I would say that. We've seen teams later in the season for the London games come out almost like 9 days ahead because they've had a bye week ahead of the game, and having that training, adapting to the jet lag, adapting to the food, all of those things make a big difference to these players. And certainly, leading up to this game, Aaron Rodgers has been quite vocal about the travel arrangements for the Steelers to get there. He hasn't been happy. Then again, when is Aaron Rodgers ever happy?
He wants an ayahuasca flight or something. He probably wants like a meditation booth on the plane for himself and whatever. He's never happy, is he?
But yeah, I think often the teams that adapt best to it not being normal is probably the best way of saying it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the best who travels the best and gives themselves the most time and adapt, but which teams can adapt to the abnormality of the whole thing. As you say, it's at Croke Park. It's at the home of a sport none of them will ever have heard of. As amazing as the GAA is, and obviously people in Ireland love it, it hasn't crossed the Atlantic yet. And so there will be all of that to deal with. I should imagine the changing rooms will probably just be conference rooms because Croke Park's never needed changing rooms that size. And all of those things, it's certainly a very different thing for these NFL players that are used to the life of luxury in their stadiums. Yeah,
and the Steelers should be backed by a decent support here. They are the home team, and their ownership group are Irish in heritage as well. So it is a bit of and the Steelers did play here in 1997. I think they were one of the last teams to play in Ireland in a preseason game. So they should be backed by a majority Steelers crowd. But two defenses coming in with 5 takeaways each last week into this game. JJ McCarthy's still out for the Vikings as well, so Carson Wentz will be playing. So that obviously gives it another element. And I think Aaron Rodgers this week is going to expect a lot of pressure from this Vikings defense, and he's going to have to navigate that, isn't he?
Yeah, and I think, the Steelers are the betting underdog for a reason in going into this game. I think the Rodgers is going to be under pressure, but he historically has one of the fastest releases in the league. He can get out of trouble. It's just whether time has slowed him down.
Yeah, underwhelming. A bit of an underwhelming performance against the Patriots last week as well. They got the win. They got the 7-point win. But yeah, for me, the jury is still out on this Steelers team a little bit. Yes, we know how good the defense is, and the likes of Jalen Ramsey has really shown the player that he is recently after going to Pittsburgh from Miami. He's obviously had a tough few years in Miami where he probably didn't play his best football, and he's returned to form now from the Steelers, and he's been a massive part of this team. And I think TJ Watt got his first sack last week as well, so a welcome return for him. But yeah, for me, the jury is still out on the Steelers. I will be picking the Vikings to win this game in me and Eden's predictions, but I do think it is a very interesting matchup. It's slightly earlier as well. Obviously, that's not going to matter to the players because they will be in Ireland and they should be over that hurdle. But it just gives an extra element, doesn't it? Something a little bit extra, and it's often who handles this occasion best.
Yeah, and looking at the Vikings, McCarthy's out, but they get Jordan Addison back this week after his suspension. And Pittsburgh's defense have given up a league high 32 plays of either 20 plus passing yards or 12 plus rushing yards this season. So Addison comes back. You've got Jefferson. Jordan Mason played well last week. You've got some real sort of
Hopkinson, huge part of the offense.
You've got big play opportunity there against a team that struggles against big plays. So I think, yes, McCarthy's out, but Wentz knows what he's doing, has travelled and played in London before. Certainly we could be looking at a Vikings offense that really sort of wants to get going quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move on to our second game. Fascinating matchup again, the Rams against the Colts. I've got written down here, is this the first big test for the Colts, do you think? Obviously, they're 3-0. They've had an outstanding start, but they've played the Dolphins, the Titans, and a 1-point win against the Broncos, who, are good. But is this the first test to see if the Colts are going to be legit this season, do you think?
It's hard to say. I mean, you know me well for my freezing cold takes at times. And I think the Rams are one of those teams at the moment that is slightly overrated because of their recent history. I don't think they are as good as people maybe think they are. And so I think the Broncos may well have been a bigger test for the Colts than the Rams will be this weekend. That said, Dan Jones has only been sacked twice so far this season. And the Rams are tied most sacks in the league.
Yeah, so that defensive line is frightening, isn't it?
So, Daniel Jones's big issue in New York was time in the pocket, protection from a bad offensive line. Obviously, this Colts offensive line's better, but if he's not had much pressure so far, could he start to crumble if the Rams bring the heat?
Yeah, and the Rams coming into this game after a heartbreaking loss in Philly, they give away that lead, and is that going to be an even bigger test for the Colts, where they've got a bit of a chip on their shoulder from last week? They're at home as well, and I think Sean McVay's such an experienced coach, isn't he? That he'll really want to motivate these guys to. They've got this division is kind of up for grabs. There's a lot of ambiguity with some of these teams in this division, and I think Sean McVay will be really keen on keeping the Rams on track to not fall into that trap of being really inconsistent. He wants to establish the Rams at the top of this division and let the other three teams around them kind of fight amongst themselves almost. And I personally think this will be the biggest test for the Colts. I take your point about the Broncos. I kind of think the other way. I kind of think the Broncos are a little bit overrated, and I do think the Rams, maybe not overrated, but I think they overachieved last season, and we're starting to see the actual level that they're at now. They're certainly not a bad team, but I don't think they're hugely great as well. And I do think the Rams have underperformed a little bit this season, and there's more to come from this team. But yeah, that defensive line is really, really good. But it is worth, newly nicknamed Indiana Jones has been outstanding so far, hasn't he? It doesn't matter who you can say they haven't played the best teams. He has played really well. Jonathan Taylor's been outstanding. He's been, as a fantasy owner of him, he's been absolutely great. And Tyler Warren, the rookie, has played a big part in this offense so far, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. And you're very right about Taylor there. He leads the league in rushing yards so far this season. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off of Danny Dimes, as he was known in New York, Indiana Jones now. I think that leading the league in rushing, having a player you can hand the ball off, means you can open up that play action, which is what Daniel Jones was good at in New York. Really sort of opens up that offense. And then having a tight end that, you can trust, albeit a rookie, you can trust that, he's going to be there for those check downs. You've got to coach a player like Daniel Jones knowing his limits. You've got to play it in a smart way. The flip to that is the Rams were only allowing 3.9 yards a carry so far this season, and have only given up one rushing touchdown. So whilst Jonathan Taylor has thus far been very good, is that Rams defense going to maybe look to shut him down more than maybe some of the other teams?
Yeah, and I think especially, yes, they have played well so far, but you look at the Colts' weapons out wide, it's not star-studded. You got Michael Pittman, who he's played very well this season so far, but he's not somebody you'd look at as a top receiver. Alec Pierce, the same. They're relying on a rookie like Tyler Warren to kind of play a big part for them. And is it Josh Downs, the other receiver there, who's played? They've all played well so far this season, but you're not terrified by that lineup on paper, are you? As a defensive backs unit?
No, they're players that you might have on your fantasy roster, but you're not going to be playing them very often.
Yeah.
Josh Downs, I think, pre-season was the player that people thought might be the wide receiver 1 on that team, but I don't think he'd be a wide receiver 3 on most teams. So, is it a case of Daniel Jones is making them look good? Is that maybe a fair thing to say at the moment?
Well, I think this week we'll kind of find out a lot about the Colts. If they can win this game, we might have to start thinking, these guys might be pretty legit in what is a huge year for Shane Steichen, because I think if it had gone the other way, he could have been really in trouble. And so far, he's doing a marvelous job of really recovering this team from what was a slide year on year, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they've got a really good opportunity in a very poor division.
Yeah.
Certainly the Titans don't look like they're going to be winning very much this season. The Jags have a lot of learning to do before they can be, a team that is working well. And I think the Texans are disappointing. They were disappointing last year as well, but I think
a few injuries on that team are holding them back, I think, as well, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think as someone who has had Nick Chubb in the past on fantasy teams, I wanted him to come through there whilst Joe Mixon was out injured, but it just doesn't seem to be really firing away in the way that they would have hoped to.
Yeah. Moving on to the Chiefs and the Ravens, always a classic, these two. Mahomes against Lamar. both of these teams 1-2 coming into this game, which is a surprise, but they have had pretty tough starts. It has to be said. They have played in big games. They have Chiefs obviously had that rematch with the Eagles, which the Super Bowl rematch, sorry, that they lost, and losing to the Chargers as well. They got their first win last week against the Giants. Same for the Ravens, losses to the Lions and the Bills. So it has been a tough start for these teams. But it does feel kind of crazy that, after week 4, yes, they could tie. That is a possibility. But it's more likely that one of these teams is 1-3 after 4 weeks, which puts the pressure on this game for both of these teams, doesn't it? And they'll both be desperate to go back to 500. Do you think it feels especially big for Kansas City because of the way the Chargers have started in this season?
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. Certainly for the Chiefs, it's a bigger game because the Chargers are that much better. And the Broncos, underrated, overrated, depending on who you're asking, are also looking like they could be a wild card playoff team. So they're looking at a division that is harder to get out of. For once, the AFC North isn't looking overly strong. Certainly, the Bengals don't look to be a challenger, and the Browns are the Browns at the moment. They need some more time. So I think for both teams, a 1-3 start wouldn't be the end of the world, but you really do start to worry there. Where I think pre-season there would have been 3 teams you'd have seen as favourites in the AFC to be getting that bye week in the playoffs. And these would have been 2 of them. Again, like the game we reviewed where we talked about it being, ringed in the schedule as Super Bowl preview, this, a lot of people would have said, could have been your AFC Championship preview. And at the moment, 1-3, it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, and we said how big this game is for Kansas City, but for the Ravens, as we kind of alluded to earlier, if they lose this game, they then would have lost to the Bills, Lions, and Chiefs, all Super Bowl contenders around them. And it does again raise those questions of, are they able to raise their game against the better teams? And it's a really big game for them to prove that they can beat a contender as well, isn't it?
Yes, and particularly for the Ravens, who are 1-5 against the Mahomes-led Chiefs in the time that he's been there. You start to get to a point where you just feel, as a franchise, you've got no chance. 1-6 against the Mahomes-led Chiefs is a very rough position to be in. When you consider they're not in the same division, they don't play each other every year for sure. That's a very tough place to be. And I think, surprisingly, the Ravens' defense statistically is very poor this season. It's rare for the Ravens. Partially that's probably because they've played the Lions and the Bills so far. 3 games in, it's hard to say statistically something's good or bad. But if it keeps going on that trajectory after playing the Chiefs, after playing maybe 1 or 2 slightly worse teams, you really start to be quite worried as a Ravens fan.
Yeah, absolutely. Another huge showdown. And moving on to our 4th game that we're going to preview, the Micah Parsons return to Dallas as he goes back to the Cowboys with the Packers. And after that blockbuster trade in the preseason, as it was, just before the regular season started, does he come into this game with a chip on his shoulder, do you think? Or is he relatively happy with what's transpired?
I think there's a massive chip on his shoulder. I think, pre the trade, or all of the to-do about him wanting out and his relationship with Jerry Jones and Jerry Jones calling him Michael Parsons or by accident because he didn't know the player's name. I think this could be one of those games where it's a real test of his psychology. Is he the sort of player that reaches another level when he's angry, when he's a bit pissed off? Or is he the sort of player that makes mistakes when he's angry? He's a young player in the league, albeit now on a very, very large contract. But it'd be interesting to see where his psychology sits, because a lot of defensive linemen are the sort that start to make mistakes when they get angry rather than reaching another level of their game.
And we've seen him obviously in week one. He was limited in his snaps because he'd only just got to the team and he was still learning the defense. I think he primarily went in on third down situations where he had a clear lane to rush the passer, etc. But now, after going into week 4, he should be pretty much up to speed with the defense now, and we can expect him to play the majority of this game. And as we mentioned with the Packers defensive line earlier and how impressive they've been, Xavier McKinney got his first pick last week as well, who was huge for this defense last season. This feels like a huge game for Micah Parsons especially, but also the Packers coming in off that shock loss to the Browns last week as well. They're going to want to atone for that and really establish themselves as a contender for the Super Bowl this season. And the Cowboys 1 and 2, very up and down, very Cowboys-like. They looked very good in that loss against the Eagles in week 1. And even Jerry Jones said in his interview he was very bullish about the team, as you'd expect him to be. If we play like that this season, we'll win a lot of football games. And I have to say I agreed with him, because they were very good in week 1. But then they get laced by the Bears last week. And it's just, are the Cowboys going to be the team that raise their game against these better teams, and then we see them fall off against, the other teams, or is it going to be same old Cowboys?
I think the Cowboys are your classic under-12s football team. They play to the level of their opponents, and if they're playing Real Madrid, they'll be Barcelona, and if they're playing Stevenage, they'll be Accrington Stanley. It's they're that sort of team. I think CeeDee Lamb's out injured this week. That's going to be a massive loss for them. From a fantasy perspective. From a fantasy perspective, Jake Ferguson 12 plus targets the last 2 games. So, if he has another 12 plus target game this week, he's certainly one to keep an eye out for in your fantasy games. But I think CeeDee's such a key player for them, such a go-to. It'll be a real test of George Pickens and whether he, whether he can be that stand-in 1 or whether he's definitely a 2.
Huge game for Dak as well. I mean, we've seen throughout Dak's career flashes of brilliant quarterback play, and he almost personifies his team, doesn't he, in that he's so inconsistent. We've seen great play and we've seen some awful play from Dak, and I think it's a huge game for him to test himself against one of the best teams, an old school traditional rival as well. I know they're not divisional rivals, but they're 2 very historic teams who have been good in the past, who have a history against each other, and it's a huge week, definitely. That's going to be fascinating to see. And our last game that we're going to preview is the Dolphins against the Jets. A bit of a toilet bowl, this one, so far in the early season. Both teams winless, and it's a huge game for both, especially Mike McDaniel. I think if Miami lose this game, they would have lost to all of their divisional opponents so far in week 4. And we mentioned the Jets. Have they been a bit unlucky, do you think, so far this season to be 0-3? They've been in close games apart from the Bills game. Obviously, Justin Fields didn't play last week as well, so they've had a bit of bad luck with injuries there. He's back this week. Do you think they are a little bit unlucky to be 0-3?
It's hard to say. I mean, for both the Jets and the Dolphins, they've had no defensive turnovers this season at all. No picks, no fumbles, no nothing. And I think, for a team coached by Aaron Glenn, inferior team trying to bring up that defense, to have nothing going in that column on the stat sheet 3 weeks in is quite worrying. I think last week, you lose Fields, who's meant to be the starter for this season, and it's Tyrod Taylor instead. they could have won that game, and I think they might well have done if Fields had been playing. But that's hard to say. I think offensively, the offensive line's struggling. The run game is struggling. I mentioned earlier, Breece Hall averaging 2.6 yards a carry across the last 2 weeks. Braylon Allen might start to pick up a few more snaps if that continues. I think, at what point do you lay the blame at Breece Hall's door? Which would be a shame because I have him in our fantasy league and I'm not doing the best already. But I think, we've highlighted the last couple of games, a few games today as Super Bowl preview games and playoff preview games. And I think this could be a who's got the number one overall pick. Very possibly in 6 weeks' time, we could be looking at these teams and then only have 1 or 2 wins each and be really discussing, which quarterback's going to who.
And at the start of the season, I said to Eden on here that I think that this is Mike McDaniel's last year in Miami. I am 100% convinced that prediction is coming true. And I've actually shifted that to think, is this Mike McDaniel's last week in Miami? If they lose this game, as I mentioned there, they would have lost to all 3 divisional opponents so far. Is it time for him to go if they lose this game?
It's hard to say. I mean, he is, an offensive genius head coach. That is his purpose, and the offense isn't firing at all. That could all turn around, but you could win this game and still have had a bad offensive performance. So is losing the game definitely the key to him going, or is it just a waiting game? I don't know. Interestingly, you get Darren Waller back this week for his debut. Yeah. He's not had much to say over the last couple of seasons, but he is, where we were talking earlier about your tight ends that are run blockers and pass catchers. He is very much a pass catching tight end. He's not run blocking for anyone. But that could give you another option across the middle, might maybe free up Tyreek Hill a little bit more. So if he can get that offense working, maybe his job's safe for another week. But I don't know.
I slightly disagree. I don't disagree that the offense isn't firing. I mean, the whole team isn't firing, but I think the problem is the defense. The defense has been awful. As you mentioned there, it's no turnovers, no interceptions, no fumbles. And they are just, I mean, we saw in the Colts game, the Colts scored on every drive in that game. They scored points on every drive. And it was an improved performance against the Bills last week on both sides of the ball. But Anthony Weaver's defense is just not working. And I think we are caught in this. We're caught in this trap, really, of where, and I said it to Eden a few weeks ago, where we came from Brian Flores' ultra aggressive, pressure. Like he'd send more than four or five blitzers on 60% of snaps or something crazy like that. And that was really good. And then we went to Vic Fangio, who's completely the opposite. He will sit in a too high shell. He's not going to pressure much. He's going to rely on his defensive backs. So there's players in that team who have gone from one system to the other, one extreme to the other. And now you're in Anthony Weaver's system. And I think Anthony Weaver's caught between the two. He doesn't know what to do. And these players are just so confused. Our coverage is so soft. We're having players like Kader Coe, who is just not good enough to play in the NFL. I think he tries to make too many big splash plays and tries to jump balls when he just needs to be covering his receiver and make a play on the receiver and make the receiver drop the ball and trying to be a hero. And he's not the only one. It's just, as you say, that the defensive front, we've got no excuses. We had injuries last year. You had Chubb out. You had Jalen Phillips missed a lot of time, and we had to rely on like Chop Robinson, the rookie, to come in and play well, and he did. And Zach Seelert, who has been awesome in the last few years. Now there's no excuse. Everyone's healthy. everyone on that defense is healthy, and it is not working. And I think even if Mike McDaniel is safe, because I think Chris Greer and him are kind of in the same boat where the fans are calling for both of them to go. It's not just Mike McDaniel. I think Anthony Weaver could go first, and I think he may deserve to go first, because if we lose this game and we lose it heavily again, there needs to be something done.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair statement, and it's easier to move on from a defensive coordinator than it is to move on from a head coach, just generally. And it's difficult when you're in a situation where your player acquisition, whether it's a GM or a VP of player personnel, or however the team sort of refers to the guy who makes those deals, when you're in a situation where you potentially need to move on from them and the head coach, you need to do it at the same time. Because if they let McDaniels go and they keep Greer, and then they get a new head coach, and then they let Greer go in a year's time, you're just continuing the problem. You need to bring in two guys with the same vision, like the Lions have done with Holmes and Campbell. Two guys, same vision at the same time, and you can turn a franchise around. But if you're chopping and changing, you've got them out of sync, it's just going to keep going. You'll have the same problems year on year.
Yeah, huge week for both teams. And as you mentioned, I don't know whether, I think the Jets are better than they'll be scrapping for the number one pick. Obviously, they're not going to be right up there as contenders. I do think they will grow as the season goes on. But at the moment, huge game for both. And yeah, could we be sitting here next week where Mike McDaniel's gone? And so week 4 is around the corner. Let's run you through some of the other games in the NFL this week. The Falcons taking on the Washington Commanders. The Giants taking on the LA Chargers. The Texans, a divisional matchup against the Titans. The Bucks against the Eagles. That'll be an interesting matchup. Two really good teams there. Patriots against the Panthers. The Bills against the Saints. The Lions against the Browns. The 49ers against the Jaguars as well. I think that could be a really good matchup as well. The Raiders take on the Bears. And the Broncos against the Bengals on Monday night as well. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back next week. Thank you, Ollie, for stepping in. You've been very good. Have you enjoyed it?
Yeah, I didn't know quite what to expect, but it's been good. Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much for joining me, Ollie. Enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll see you again next week.